Ms. Richards, can I just raise something with you which arose to me on reflection of the material which you produced this morning? You produced quite a lot of material which evidences that there was a knowledge that voluntary blood, non-remunerated blood donors were less likely to produce an effective product than were paid donors, particularly those from the United States in the social groups from which they came. You've established that there was material which showed that as one increased the pool size, so the risk of infection within that pool from one or two donations was increased. At the end of yesterday, I asked Dr. Owen what he could say about the relative pool sizes used to produce product in the NHS on the one hand and commercially on the other. In the documentary which we've just seen, there was a reference, two references, one to the United States, where I think they quoted the figure of 2,000 to 6,000 litres of plasma from which pools were made, and the other, the NHS, 100 to 200 litres of plasma. If, and this is the point I want to run past you, I'm raising it with you really so that if anyone from their different perspectives who's listening, from the recognised legal representatives who wish to comment and correct me if this is a wrong deduction, one inference would be that assuming, and the assumption may be wrong, but assuming that a litre is composed of two donations, each roughly half a litre of blood, or maybe 4 donations, probably more likely because a litre is a couple of pints, give or take. That would mean that in the States there would have been between 8,000 and 24,000 donations, individual donations in a pool, and in the UK somewhere between 400 and 600, if my arithmetic is right. Again, it may need to be checked. Of course, we don't know, that's donations, it's not necessarily donors, because if the evidence produced by those who made the documentary is right, a number of those who went to give donations at the blood centres, plasma collection centres in the States, gave it repeatedly, twice a week, and may possibly have given it to more than one centre in addition. So there may have been a smaller number of donors, but that might give some idea of the relative size of pools.
Yes, it might, sir.
That's just what I wanted to raise, to see if those inferential figures, the figures, bear that inference, and if anyone has any suggestion that they don't, they can come back to you.
Yes, thank you, sir. So the next document that we're going to look at is PRSE 304064. And it's a response from Dr. Cash to the World in Action programme that we've just watched. It's a BMJ, British Medical Journal, 24th of January 1976. If we could go down a bit further, please, Paul. It's the letter-headed Commercial and NHS Factor 8 Concentrates. This was Dr. Cash's reaction to the programme. One of the inevitable dangers of a journalistic approach to medical problems is that limitations in time, radio or TV or space, newspapers or periodicals, may give rise to a selection of comments made by experts which, when taken out of context and put together for a programme or article, are misleading. This probably arose during the ITN television series World in Action. Then he says in the second paragraph, there's no doubt that the import into the United Kingdom of Factor 8 concentrates derived from external sources, however well screened for hepatitis viruses, represents an unequivocal pathway by which, we can have the top of the next column, please, Paul. the level of a potentially lethal virus into the whole community is being deliberately increased. And so I draw attention to that, not least because of your question to Lord Owen yesterday about the concept and his evidence of deliberate decisions. Although the absolute magnitude of this problem is exaggerated and over-dramatised by the television programmes, nobody with direct or indirect responsibilities for this phenomenon would wish to belittle the serious nature of the moral and practical dilemma which face us all. And then he goes on to comment specifically about the £500,000 and NHS targets, which is obviously an issue that we'll be revisiting in future hearings. The next document, please, Paul, is HSOC 0016695. Oh, I'm so sorry, yes. HSOC 0016685. I have transcribed it incorrectly in my notes. So, thanks. This is an article published in July 1976 in the Journal of Laboratory and Clinical Medicine. It's by Hoofnagel and others. The title, Prevalence of Hepatitis B Surface Antigen in Commercially Prepared Plasma Products. I just want to go to the last paragraph of the whole article, please, Paul. So the last page of the document. Sorry, the one before that, not the list of references, the last text above that. Thank you. So the last paragraph of the article, picking it up in the second sentence, recently it's been shown that not all post-transfusion hepatitis can be classified as type B hepatitis. More startling was the finding that the non-B post-transfusion hepatitis could not be classified as type A hepatitis. This has led investigators to postulate the existence of a third human hepatitis virus, a virus which also appears to be harboured in blood. It's possible that this third hepatitis virus can withstand the pooling and fractionation procedure, and that it's responsible for some cases of hepatitis following the use of high-risk plasma products. At present, there are no markers and no means of detecting this virus in blood. Until the nature of this virus and its disease is elucidated, it is important to consider human blood and pooled plasma products as potentially infectious. At the present time, fibrinogen, AHF and factor IX concentrates remain high-risk plasma products which must be considered likely to produce overt hepatitis in susceptible recipients. So again, the clear recognition of non-A, non-B hepatitis there. Paul, if we could then have CGRA 40934. If we just zoom in a little on that letter. So this is another letter by Professor Dr. J. Garrett Allen from Stanford University. The date of this is May 1976. And you'll see it's headed The High Cost of Cheap Blood. It's a communication to the New England Journal of Medicine. It is essentially on the same theme as we've seen from Dr. Garrett Allen, and indeed we saw in the programme. Just picking it up in the last, or the paragraph that's already highlighted on this copy. He's referring to recommendations made in the States from the Council on Wage and Price Stability, CWPS, and says they reason that because patients with haemophilia have been given transfusions, they have had their hepatitis and can receive products from high-risk commercial donors. This is the same error the British made in 1974 when they augmented their supply of haemophilic concentrates with commercially prepared products from American pharmaceutical companies. Krask reported a rise from 3 to 50% in cases of hepatitis among his small group of patients with haemophilia. As his studies have extended, the score in late November was 58 cases with 2 deaths. This hazard was predicted before it was observed. And then, please, Paul, PRSE 40381. This is an article published in the Yale Journal of Biology and Medicine in July 1976 by Purcell, Alter and Dienstag, non-A, non-B hepatitis. If we could go to the second page, please, Paul. Picking it up in the second paragraph. The development of sensitive tests for indicators of hepatitis A virus infection now makes it possible to divide non-B hepatitis into type A hepatitis and non-A, non-B hepatitis. Although the term type C hepatitis has been suggested for the latter disease, there is evidence that non-A, non-B hepatitis may be caused by more than one agent, and we believe it is wiser, therefore, to use the less mellifluous but more accurate designation type non-A, non-B hepatitis. The term type C hepatitis should be reserved until type non-A, non-B hepatitis can be defined serologically. And hence, we see non-A, non-B hepatitis as the terminology used pretty much from this time onwards until the late 1980s. And then if we could go to the next page, please, Paul. Picking it up in the third paragraph. As with type B hepatitis, type non-A, non-B hepatitis occurs significantly more frequently following transfusion of commercially derived blood than following receipt of blood derived from volunteer sources. Thus, type non-A, non-B disease has been found to occur 5 to 10 times more frequently following transfusion of the former than following transfusion of the latter. And then the next paragraph begins, the epidemiology of type non-A, non-B hepatitis resembles more closely that of type B hepatitis than of type A disease. And then if we can go to the next page, please. Picking it up about halfway down, although type non-A, non-B hepatitis is associated with less severe acute illness than type B disease, and again, the emphasis there is upon acute, so the short term, first 6 months. The long-term prognosis for the two diseases may be similar, and then there's reference to elevated transaminase values, reference to various studies on particular patients, and then the last sentence of that paragraph, thus chronic non-A, non-B hepatitis is not necessarily a benign infection and may be the cause of a significant proportion of chronic hepatitis not identifiable as type B disease. Could we then, please, Paul, still in July 1976, go to PRSE 301579. Now, the context of this document is a discussion triggered by the recommendation of the advisory group on testing for the presence of hepatitis B surface antigen, a particular recommendation to discontinue the practice of permanently excluding donors with a history of jaundice. If we could go to the fifth page, please, Paul. What we have there, the document is headed Comment by the Royal College of Physicians. So the Royal College of Physicians were commenting upon this recommendation and suggesting that the recommendation should not be implemented. And about halfway down the page, we have a passage which says this. Furthermore, transfusion hepatitis may be caused by viruses other than hepatitis B, for which at present no tests are available. The existence of hepatitis C was postulated recently. That's a comment from the Royal College of Physicians opposing the recommendation. If we look at the previous page, Paul, this is the response of the DHSS to the observations by the Royal College of Physicians. They make a number of points. I just wanted to pick up the point at paragraph 7. The DHSS response is, no evidence has been collected yet in UK to substantiate the presence of a hepatitis C. And it may be thought there is a foreshadowing there of the mantra of no conclusive proof that we will see when we look at documentation relating to HIV. Paul, if we could then please have PRSE 302602. This is an article in The Lancet, we're now 12th of March 1977, by Dienstag, Purcell, Alter and others. If we could go to the third page, please, Paul. Left-hand column towards the bottom of the page, if you could scroll down. So we see a passage beginning, besides these data, other evidence for non-A, non-B agents, and that's the data referred to earlier in the article, I won't go to the detail of that. Other evidence for non-A, non-B agents has been accumulating. Non-A, non-B hepatitis has now been recognised in Britain, possibly not by the Department of Health and Social Services if the previous document is accurate, in Australia, Japan, Costa Rica and possibly Germany. Not only does non-A, non-B hepatitis occur worldwide, but it's apparently spread by modes other than transfusion. And then we see a range of different routes identified, including hemodialysis, renal transplant. Several instances of chronic hepatitis have followed acute non-A, non-B hepatitis. We feel there are adequate data to support the existence of non-A, non-B viruses. So that's the medical and scientific perspective. And then if we go, please, to RLIT 40226. We see in this document that the existence of non-A, non-B hepatitis now appearing to be essentially a clinical consensus, consideration being given to the nature and seriousness of the disease. This is an article in May 1977 in Gastroenterology entitled Development of Chronic Liver Disease After Acute Non-A, Non-B Post-Transfusion Hepatitis by Nodell and others. Paul, if we could go to page 7, so it's the penultimate page. Thanks. And if we could, that's great. So under the heading discussion, that long paragraph towards the end of the paragraph, please. I'll just pick it up here. In this study, 44 cases of acute non-A, non-B post-transfusion hepatitis have been followed prospectively for development of chronic liver disease. And 10 patients, 23%, had persistent liver enzyme elevations from 12 to 36 months after acute transaminase elevations were first recorded. Liver biopsy specimens from these 10 patients provide evidence that acute non-A, non-B hepatitis C can progress to chronic liver disease and cirrhosis. And then if we go to the next page, top of the next page, the frequency with which the acute hepatitis cases caused by this non-A, non-B hepatitis producing agent progressed to chronic liver disease was high. Histologically, 8 of the 10 cases of non-A, non-B chronic hepatitis had progressed to chronic active hepatitis, and an additional patient already had developed cirrhosis. And then on the same theme, I think two further documents, RLIT 40228, please, Paul. This is in the Annals of Internal Medicine, July 1977, an article by Hoofnagel and others entitled Transmission of Non-A, Non-B Hepatitis. Again, Paul, if we can go to the penultimate page, so it's page 6 of 7. We see on the right-hand column a paragraph beginning, several clinical and epidemiologic features of non-A, non-B hepatitis have become clear from studies such as the present one. First, non-A, non-B hepatitis closely resembles type B hepatitis. The incubation period, clinical symptoms and signs, and the potential for chronicity appear to be similar to type B hepatitis. Undoubtedly, what was once referred to as serum hepatitis included both type B and non-A, non-B hepatitis. And then deals with the route of transmission, spread predominantly by the parenteral route. And then third, non-A, non-B hepatitis appears to be associated with a chronic carrier state and chronic liver disease. And then skipping a few lines, finally, non-A, non-B hepatitis appears to be common. And then, Paul, if we can have PRSE 303622. This is a report in the Lancet in September of 1978 by Professor Preston, Dr. Underwood, Dr. Mitchell, and others, based in Sheffield. It's looking at the position of chronic liver disease in haemophiliacs, and we can pick it up in the summary at the top. Systematic screening of 47 haemophiliacs in Sheffield revealed abnormal liver function tests in 36, 77%, with a tendency for these abnormalities to persist. To assess the importance of these abnormalities, percutaneous liver biopsy was carried out on 8 symptom-free patients under factor VIII cover. A wide spectrum of chronic liver disease was demonstrated, including chronic aggressive hepatitis and cirrhosis. And then if we could go to the third, with the last page of this document, Paul. Under the heading discussion, the second paragraph. We confirmed earlier observations that percutaneous liver biopsy can be carried out safely in haemophiliacs, given adequate factor VIII cover and appropriate laboratory control. As with any non-haemophiliac patient, there is a risk of hemorrhage with this procedure, but experience supports the statement of, I don't know who that is, Lizen and et al., that the potential risks of complications from liver biopsy in haemophiliacs are outweighed, etc. We also found a wide spectrum of chronic liver disease, including benign self-limiting chronic hepatitis, potentially treatable chronic aggressive hepatitis, and established cirrhosis. All our patients were symptom-free at biopsy, and it was impossible to differentiate between the different forms of liver disease on the grounds of biochemical abnormalities. Since the patients undergoing biopsy had been arbitrarily selected, it is reasonable to conclude that a large proportion of haemophiliacs receiving treatment with factor VIII have important chronic liver disease. And we'll undoubtedly, Sarah, in the course of the evidence over the coming weeks, return to Professor Preston's findings in 1978 and how others responded to them. If we could then, Paul, go to DHSC 0002191_026. This is a letter, January 1979, 8th of January 1979. It's from Dr. Dane, the School of Pathology at the Middlesex Hospital Medical School, and it's addressed to Dr. Waiter at the DHSS. It's about non-A, non-B hepatitis, and the plan was to, for there to be consideration of that at a meeting. I just wanted to pick up on the second paragraph. If one or more of these viruses is responsible for the abnormal livers, which are evidently common among haemophiliacs, then chronic liver disease due to these viruses might also be found among other transfused individuals. So an acceptance there, apparently, that abnormal livers are evidently common among haemophiliacs. The reference there to Dame Sheila is to Dame Sheila Sherlock, who was then a leading expert on liver disease. And then if we go next, please, Paul, to NHBT 40186_004. We see here a meeting invitation from the Medical Research Council. It's dated the 7th of February 1979. It's addressed to Dr. Krask. There are similar invitations to others to attend the meeting. Dear Dr. Krask, ad hoc meeting on non-A, non-B hepatitis. And it's an invitation to attend a meeting which took place on the 12th of February. Just draw attention to this. The Chief Scientist of the Department of Health and Social Security has informed the Council that this subject is being given high priority by the Department. Some batches of a commercial product containing factor IX have been found to transmit this form of hepatitis to chimpanzees, and as a result, the product has not been given a licence. This is causing considerable anxiety from the point of view of the treatment of patients. Also, laboratory staff generally are beginning to inquire about laboratory safety, and trials of blood products are becoming difficult to stage because of concern over hepatitis transmission. Two aspects on which the department sees a need for further work: research, which will identify/characterise the agent carrying non-A, non-B hepatitis, and studies leading to the development of a test for the organism or its marker. So I'm not going to go to the notes of the meeting itself. Again, undoubtedly, it's a document that we will look at again over coming months. For those who are interested, I think it can be found at PRSE 301960. Could we then please, Paul, have BART 302487? Excuse me while I just switch files. This is a communication in April 1979. It's from Dr. Kernoff at the Royal Free to Dr. Colvin at the London Hospital. If we just go to the last page for a moment, Paul, we can see it's written by Dr. Kernoff in his capacity as chairman of the Haemophilia Working Party of the NETR, Association of Haematologists. And it's addressed, if we go back to the beginning of the letter, sorry, Paul, to Dr. Colvin in his capacity as secretary of the NETR Association of Haematologists.
North East Thames, is it?
Oh, North East Thames region, yes, it would be. And if we go to the second page, please, Paul, under the heading 2, types of therapeutic material available. So I should add, of course, that both Dr. Colvin and Dr. Kernoff were closely involved with the treatment of patients with bleeding disorders. So types of therapeutic material available. If we pick it up halfway down that paragraph, Dr. Kernoff says this to Dr. Colvin: not only is commercial concentrate expensive, but there are both clinical and moral reasons for preferring the NHS material. The clinical reason is the growing awareness of the probability that commercial concentrates have a higher risk of transmitting non-A, non-B hepatitis than NHS material. And then Dr. Kernoff says this: this is a serious disease with long-term consequences, which, as far as is known, is at present much less common in the UK than in those parts of the world, particularly the USA, where donor blood for commercial concentrates is collected. We may therefore be introducing diseases which are not yet endemic in the UK. The moral reason for preferring NHS material is that it seems inappropriate to many that the maintenance of adequate standards of treatment to NHS patients should be dependent on blood obtained from paid donors in foreign countries. But we can see there a recognition of the nature of non-A, non-B hepatitis, a serious disease with long-term consequences. And if we can then move from 1979 to 1980 and have, please, RLIT 40180. This is a study which looks at the position of children. It's from Archives of Disease in Childhood, 1980. Liver disease complicating severe haemophilia in childhood by McGrath and others. Again, the research appears to be based at Sheffield Children's Hospital and Sheffield University Medical School. Summary: liver biopsies were performed in 5 boys aged between 2 and 9 years with severe classical haemophilia who had persistently abnormal liver function tests. Abnormal histology was present in all. 4 had chronic persistent hepatitis, and the 5th chronic aggressive hepatitis with early cirrhosis. Evidence of previous hepatitis B infection was present in 1 patient, etc., etc. The significance of these findings in young boys is discussed, as is the role of exposure to factor VIII containing blood products. It is concluded that cryoprecipitate should be used in preference to large pool factor VIII concentrates in children with haemophilia. And if we could go to the last page, please. And I'm grateful, but this was a document flagged up by representatives for one group of core participants on the basis it does look specifically at the position of children. And if we go to the bottom of the left-hand column on the last page, Paul, this study suggests that only brief exposure to factor VIII concentrates, 13 to 45 batches, is necessary to produce chronic liver damage in at least 25% of haemophiliacs requiring regular treatment. As children usually receive treatment in hospital until considered suitable for treatment at home, we recommend such patients should, if possible, be treated with cryoprecipitate in preference to large pool factor VIII concentrates until the significance of the chronic liver damage is better understood, or until such factor VIII concentrates have been refined to exclude viral hepatitis agents. And then there's a discussion about the use of biopsies. Two further documents from 1980. The first is WITN 0282008, please, Paul. This is a memo, a minute from Dr. Diana Woolford to Mr. Harley within the Department of Health and Social Security, and it's dated the 15th of September 1980. The context is, and we had some allusion to this in Lord Owen's evidence yesterday, the possible commercial takeover by Beecham's of BPL. In the context of discussing that, Dr. Woolford said this, third paragraph, I must emphasise that 90% of all post-transfusion and blood product infusion hepatitis in the USA and elsewhere is caused by non-A, non-B hepatitis viruses, which, unlike hepatitis B, cannot at present be detected by testing donor blood. This form of hepatitis can be rapidly fatal, particularly when acquired by patients with pre-existing liver disease, or can lead to progressive liver damage. It can also result in a chronic carrier state, thus increasing the pool of these viruses in the community. So an important recognition there, sir, in 1980 by Dr. Woolford of the DHSS of the serious nature of non-A, non-B hepatitis. And then, finally, from 1980, Paul, could we have PRSE 303209, please? So this is a document authored by Dr. Krask for a symposium of the Royal College of Physicians, I think. It's called The Epidemiology of Factor VIII and IX Associated Hepatitis in the UK. And if we could turn, please, to page 7. We see this being said, under the heading, first of all, complications, it said most cases of non-A, non-B hepatitis are mild illnesses. 6 cases have been reported as severe. 2 patients have died in the acute stage of the disease, but there were complicating factors in both instances. Then there's a discussion of acute fulminating hepatitis. And then a discussion of chronic liver disease. There's reference to persistently elevated levels, and then this. Most of these patients are symptomless. However, a few have clinical features suggestive of chronic liver disease, but the ethical problems associated with the indications for liver biopsy have meant that few patients have so far undergone this procedure. About 40 patients have undergone biopsy in the UK, and approximately 50% of these have histological evidence of chronic persistent hepatitis. Other patients showed evidence of chronic liver disease or cirrhosis. And then, skipping down a sentence, the only common factor was regular treatment with factor VIII concentrate. Most of the patients in this group are children or young adults, although the age range at Oxford is 6 to 70 years. It seems likely that some patients will develop severe chronic liver disease over the next 10 years. The reason for drawing attention to that in particular, sir, obviously, is Dr. Krask's close association with the Haemophilia Centre Directors Organisations, the meetings of which he attended on a regular basis and to whom he gave regular advice.
Will you just give me one moment? Yes, I have a note just to compare what he was saying in February 1979 with what he's saying there. My note, 1979, the reference is PRSE 301960. You mentioned it earlier, that reference, where he was quoting the views, not his views, but the views of what he described as American and German workers, that up to 40% of non-A, non-B infections progressed to chronic liver disease. And so far as chronic liver disease and non-A, non-B infections are concerned, that's what he seemed to be saying then. Is he saying anything different in this article?
I'm not sure that he is, sir. It may be that under the heading complications, where he says most cases of non-A, non-B hepatitis are mild illnesses, he's thinking there of the acute phase and the acute phase only. And that would make sense both of what he previously said and with what he then goes on to say under the heading chronic liver disease.
So that might be a reconciliation.
It might be. Paul, could we then have, please, HSOC 308581, please? This is a series of Hansard extracts from various dates. Could we go to the last page of the document, please? So here we have an extract from Hansard on the 24th of February 1981. So we're now in early 1981. This is Lord Cullen, who is responding on behalf of the government. That's apparent from the previous page. And Lord Cullen says this: "My lords, blood products are not purchased centrally, they're purchased by health authorities. I regret that up-to-date information on the expenditure on imported products is not available." It's obviously pertinent to some of the observations from the witness yesterday. "The country from which these products come is mainly the United States. Some also come from Austria and one or two other European countries. So far as concerns making sure that these products are free from infection, undoubtedly the careful checks which are made at all stages are extremely effective for all except a very few products, one of which is used in the case of haemophiliacs. There is a danger that factor VIII, which has to be injected into haemophiliacs, can have it in a strain of hepatitis, and at the moment there is no way of testing for these strains. That is the one product as to whose freedom from infection we cannot be absolutely certain. However, every effort is made to see that it's not infected, and although occasionally something may happen, it is not of a serious nature." That is obviously, it's fair to say, in fairly stark contrast to the material in the medical and scientific literature that we've been looking at from the second half of the 70s. 1981, of course, is where we begin to pick up the first reports of what will become known as AIDS. Paul, could we please have CGRA 40242? This is the June 1981 Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report by the Centre for Disease Control in the States. And we see here under the heading Pneumocystis Pneumonia Los Angeles, identification in the period October 1980 to May 1981, 5 young men, all active homosexuals, treated for biopsy-confirmed PCP at 3 different hospitals in Los Angeles, California. I won't go through all the various different MMWR reports, but what we see when we trace them through is that as they continue through 1981, more and more cases are reported. So a month later, for example, in July 1981, the report is of 26 cases of Kaposi's sarcoma and a number of further cases of PCP, and that continues. If we have, please, Paul, before I return to HIV and AIDS, one further reference from this time on hepatitis, PRSE 303110. This is an article in the British Medical Journal, July 1981, and it's just perhaps worth reading the first paragraph. Despite advances in screening donors and in blood fractionation, post-transfusion hepatitis remains the major complication of the modern treatment of haemophilia. The diagnosis is usually inferred from abnormalities in the results of hepatic biochemical tests rather than from clinical evidence. Surveys in haemophiliacs have shown changes in the liver architecture consistent with previous viral assault, including those of chronic persistent and chronic active hepatitis and of cirrhosis. And then this, indeed in some cases, early death from liver disease might prove to be the price paid by haemophiliacs for the improved quality of life afforded by the easy availability of clotting factor concentrates. The issue there addressed in the British Medical Journal, obviously a very commonly read journal for medical practitioners, in those somewhat stark terms. If we go then, please, Paul, to CGRA 40424, we are now in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report for the end of August of 1981, and a significant number of further cases of Kaposi's sarcoma and PCP are reported. Third line, since July the 3rd, CDC has received reports of an additional 70 cases of these two conditions in persons without underlying disease. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but we then pick up in December of 1981 a number of articles in the New England Journal of Medicine which consider this condition about these previously healthy individuals contracting PCP and or Kaposi's sarcoma. If we could then go, please, Paul, to PRSC 304476. The second page, please. This is the Lancet, December 1981. So we have the articles in the States in the New England Journal of Medicine, and in the Lancet, a letter which is referring to the recent reports from the United States and sets out what the authors understand to be the first report of the condition in a patient in the United Kingdom, a patient who'd been referred to the Brompton Hospital. We then, I don't ask this to be turned up, Paul, but in January of 1982, because it's a rapidly developing picture, the New England Journal of Medicine reports now 159 documented cases reported to CDC between June and November. It's described as a serious public health problem with a high mortality rate. And then throughout 1982, the MMWR from CDC continues to report an ever-increasing number of cases of KS or serious opportunistic infections.
These are all cases generally in the community. They're not restricted to those who receive blood or blood products in any way.
Not at this stage, that's correct. And at this stage, they're predominantly being reported in gay men. And then we pick up in July of 1982 from the MMWR for the 9th of July, reports of opportunistic infections and Kaposi's sarcoma amongst Haitians in the US. And that describes of 19 patients, it says the clinical course has been severe, 10 patients have died. I'll give the reference for those who want to look it up. I won't put it up on screen, but it's PRSC 303880. And then, same date, 9th of July 1982, if we could have up on screen, please, Paul, CGRA 40288. Here we see the first cases being reported in those who have received blood products. So it's a notification or report from the Department of Health and Human Services in America to manufacturers of plasma fractionation products concerning a meeting concerning opportunistic infections in haemophilia A patients. 3 cases of PCP in patients with haemophilia A receiving anti-haemophilic factor have recently been reported to the Centres for Disease Control. All 3 patients were heterosexual white men without a history of intravenous drug abuse. And then there is reference to over the previous year, the hundreds of cases of reports, most of which had been at that stage in homosexual men and individuals who were IV drug abusers. And then the last sentence of that second paragraph, although the cause of this outbreak is unknown, the information suggests that a transmissible agent might be involved, and concern about transmission through blood and blood products has been raised. So that's 9th of July, 1982, and we see there's a reference there to a meeting planned for the following week. If we could then please go to PRSE 40523, Paul. We see this also being formally reported by the Centre for Disease Control in MMWR for July the 16th, 1982. CDC recently received reports of 3 cases of PCP among patients with haemophilia A and without other underlying disease. 2 have died. 1 remains critically ill, etc. And details are given of those patients. And then if we go to the second page, please, under the heading editorial note, second paragraph, the clinical and immunologic features these 3 patients share are strikingly similar to those recently observed among certain individuals from the following groups, and then the groups are there set out: homosexual males, IV drug users, etc. Although the cause of the severe immune dysfunction is unknown, the occurrence among 3 haemophiliac cases suggests the possible transmission of an agent through blood products. We see that this is immediately known to the Department of Health and Social Security, and we can see that from DHSC 302219_009. This is an internal DHSS minute. The date is the 16th of July 1982. It's not a 100% accurate account, but we see why when we look at the document. It's addressed to a Dr. Holgate. Dr. Holgate, American Factor 8. You will wish to know that Dr. Harold Gunson, our consultant advisor in blood transfusion, has received information from the American Bureau of Biologics via Dr. Joe Smith at NIBSC that there may be considerable publicity in the next couple of weeks concerning the safety of American Factor 8. Please forgive the layman's explanation below, and this is where it's not entirely accurate, but the essential message is clear. I hope it makes some sense. Apparently some research is about to be published showing fairly conclusively that plasma taken from homosexual drug takers contains a sort of virus which goes undetected when the plasma is tested because it's suppressed by the drugs. However, when used for Factor 8, it becomes active again. It seems that 400 haemophiliacs in the USA have exhibited signs of the virus. I don't think that is, in fact, accurate at that point in time. The report is expected to be picked up by the lay press and may cause a furore. I do not know which brands of Factor 8 are involved. From the DHSS point of view, we can defend the National Blood Transfusion Service's own record. Someone taking drugs, gay or not, would not be bled, provided that the injection marks showed. In any case, with our voluntary unpaid donor system, we do not have the same problem as in the States, where drug addicts are tempted to give blood simply for the money. However, about half of the Factor 8 bought from commercial companies is imported from the USA. Your division, when the published study is available, I understand that one of your sections scans the technical literature for such material, may have to consider revoking licenses of certain manufacturers. Of course, it may turn out that none of the Factor 8 involved is supplied to this country. And of course, that was not the case. But we can see that at the same time as this information is being published in the States, it's being shared with the Department of Health and Social Security in the way that we see there. If we then have, please, Paul, BAYP 304205. It's not the most legible of documents, but we'll see from the title, it's Summary Report on Open Meeting of PHS Committee on Opportunistic Infections in Patients with Haemophilia. So it's a report of a meeting in the States, which took place on the 27th of July 1982, considering the significance of the occurrence of opportunistic infections in PCP in those 3 patients with haemophilia, wide variety of organisations and participants. And then if we go to the second half of that page under the heading Aspects of Discussion, AIDS, it's one of the first examples of the term being used, and the sequelae of KS and OI, that's the Kaposi's sarcoma and opportunistic infections, are occurring in several populations. They are then identified. The possibility exists that it is occurring in patients with haemophilia. If the PCP observed in 3 patients with haemophilia represents the same process as seen in other groups with AIDS, then a possible mode of transmission is via blood products, in this case factor VIII concentrate. This finding would strengthen the existing hypothesis that AIDS is caused by a transmissible agent. And then if we go next, please, to PRSE 303247, we move here from the States to an international congress in Budapest of the International Society of Haematology and the International Society of Blood Transfusion. It was attended by Dr. Peter Foster of the PFC in Edinburgh in August 1982, and this is his report. If we go to the last page, please, Paul, the last page with any text on. Most of the paper is concerned with a very detailed technical discussion of issues relating to fractionation and other matters. But then he makes this reference: in discussion future problems in the treatment of haemophilia, Alidort reported that the most recent problem to surface in the USA has been 3 deaths from pulmonary infections. This has been linked with the development of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So this information about the 3 haemophiliacs in the US is clearly by this stage being widely disseminated to knowledgeable individuals. Could we then have, please, Paul, probably last document before the break, RLIT 40200. This is an article in the publication Science, a long-established journal. This article is dated the 13th of August 1982, headed New Disease Baffles Medical Community. If we look in the left-hand column towards the bottom of the page, says this: although other explanations have not been ruled out, most investigators currently think that the disease is caused by an infectious agent, possibly a new virus or a new variant of an existing virus. The spread of AIDS resembles that of hepatitis B virus. And then if we could go to the next column, please, Paul, a bit further up, thank you. This is picking it up a couple of paragraphs in. Hepatitis B is also transmitted through transfusion of whole blood or blood products. Recently, 3 individuals with haemophilia have come down with AIDS, an occurrence which is particularly disturbing because of the possibility that they acquired an infectious agent from the blood product they take to prevent bleeding. So far, however, there's no evidence linking ordinary blood transfusions to the immunodeficiency disease. And then the person cited there is a representative of the Centres for Disease Control. And yes, so I note the time. I can probably just about fit in another document, or we could break and resume after the break.
The only other thing, just I note from a quick glance at what is said there in Science, is if one looks at the 3rd column across, about halfway down, it notes that the infections seen in AIDS patients, which first began to be noticed in about mid-1979. Well, if that is correct, then it would look as though back in 1979, 2 years before the MMWR reported it in June of 81, there were developing infections, and it might suggest, might it, a long incubation period.
Yes, absolutely.
For AIDS, from whatever was causing it.
Yes.
Well, we'll take a break until 3:45.